Hi, everyone. This is Chuck Fink, and you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina. And you just heard Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers with our theme song, Asheville. You can find us on WPVM FM in Asheville at 1037 and globally at WPVMFM.org. Like I said, I'm Chuck Fink, your host, and you can hear us or watch us every Wednesday at 10 o'clock. Today, I am so excited because we have a very special guest. Sherry Lovett, and you can see Sherry. Hi, Sherry. Sherry Lovett has been a middle school teacher, an elementary media specialist, a homeschooler, educational cooperative leader, teaching artist for the Penland School of Crafts, a workshop facilitator, and through it all, a story. Through mystical Celtic stories, haunting ballads, historical narratives, and wise and wonderful folk tales, Sherry swirls together a magical stew to delight audiences from school assemblies to a variety of adult performances. Her mission is simple. Sherry wants to inspire, encourage, entertain, and connect with people through the art of storytelling. Sherry is a mother, a teacher, and a storyteller. She is an ordained minister for the purpose of officiating weddings because Sherry is a romantic. She loves nature and feels most at peace in the woods or by the sea. Though Sherry lived the first 18 years of her life in central North Carolina in a small farm, she has lived since from the coast to the mountains, enjoying the beauty of all across the Tar Heel State. Now she has a taste for more travel, figuratively holding a sign that says, "Have stories, will travel." But with 2 ears and one mouth, it's clear listening is the key to getting the best stories. Hi there, Sherry. How you doing?
I am well. How are you, Chuck?
I can't complain. Oh, well, I guess we could. It's COVID. It's that time of year, but the weather's changing. But we're storytellers. We don't complain about anything, do we?
Mostly.
I agree with you on that one. Well, I have to tell you, we have some things in common. I don't know if you know this or not, but I was a facilitator. That was my job. I had a training business, and I facilitated a lot, more than my clients wanted, I'm sure. But the other thing we did that we have in common is I homeschooled my sons for 2 years. My wife and I did. And what a great experience to bring us all together.
Mhm. Yeah, I love it. I mean, my daughter's her first year at NC State University now, but we homeschooled all the way through 8th grade because as a teacher in the world before having her, I wanted to see my own daughter learn and have the opportunity to do all those wonderful things out in the world and to move at our own pace and all that. It was great.
Well, that's wonderful. We have one other thing in common. By the way, I'm sad that we have never shared the stage together. Maybe one day that will happen. But we did share one other thing, and that was the ukulele with a major difference. Sherry, there you are. Folks, Sherry is really good at the ukulele. She took a couple lessons, caught on a really, and man, she was good. I, on the other hand, bought a ukulele so I could sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to my 2 year old granddaughter. I took lessons, and then I had a practice performance for my wife, and she could not stop laughing at how bad I was. And now little Louise, my granddaughter, has that ukulele, which she affectionately calls ukulele. So enough about that stuff. Let's get into you. Uh, how do you use storytelling in the world? What do you use it for?
I've I came to storytelling as a teacher, and I didn't really know it was a thing. If I had known earlier, I might have just gone the route of strictly being a storyteller. But I happened upon a festival at that the North Carolina Storytelling Guild was producing at Corners Folly. That was ages and ages ago, and I absolutely fell in love with storytelling at that festival. And I thought, well, I could use that in the classroom. So I started doing that, and I've been doing that ever since. As a story, as a teacher, I would use storytelling to teach all kinds of things for language arts as a natural fit, but also for history, for science. I mean, story is just the way to learn things.
Yeah.
the best, you know.
Interesting you
And
say
so
that.
I'm still teaching online now, and I use stories as a centerpiece for the lessons. I also perform on the stage, and I enjoy that as well. And I do some adult personal storytelling workshops too. So
Ah, okay. So you're busy. You're always teaching, aren't you?
yeah, I do a lot of teaching. That's my background, and my bread and butter, so to speak. Though teachers don't make a lot of money, but
Storytelling too. There's still a lot in
exactly.
that.
Exactly. So, you got to combine things. And I'm just so glad to have storytelling as a part of my life, whether I'm doing that just solely or as a part of other work.
Yeah. You mentioned that you use it in teaching. As a trainer, I would use storytelling simply because you have to keep people engaged. And if you start pontificating and if you start just listing facts, they fall asleep. With stories, they were always awake. So yeah, storytelling is a natural for just engaging with people.
It
So
is.
yeah. So what's your favorite kind of stories?
I gravitate to folk tales, the old stories that have been passed down for hundreds of years. To me, all of that, accumulated energy of having people pass it down is just a powerful thing. And I feel like they have stood the test of time. They all have truth and wisdom in them. So I love those, and mostly tell traditional materials, though I do some personal, not many, but a few. And I also enjoy historical narratives, and I tell a few historical pieces too. I'd like to do more of that because it really brings history to life when you hear it through a story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. History are not a bunch of facts. History is stories.
Like Hamilton.
Ah, you hit the button a little on that one. Yeah.
I'm one of those few people that didn't see Hamilton until recently, and it blew me away. I've never been so interested in history.
We just saw it about maybe a month and a half ago as well. And same reaction. Same
Yeah.
reaction. So yeah. You you mentioned personal narrative storytelling. That's basically what I do. I don't do the other stuff that you do, like folk tales and history. But I love having you here because you do stuff that I don't. So I think we can share that with the audience a little bit later. So, how did you get involved in storytelling?
It was Corners Folly and the North Carolina Storytelling Guild that sparked my interest in storytelling, and I used that in the classroom, like I mentioned earlier. But a pivotal time for me was right before the crash hit, 2008. So I had stayed home with my daughter, and I had been storytelling out in the world some, but at that point, we had a remodeling business, and with the construction bubble burst, we lost it. We lost everything. And so I thought, I got to get more storytelling work and help with the income. And I went to a retreat that the North Carolina Storytelling Guild does, the winter workshop. You've probably heard of that, right, Chuck?
Oh, yeah.
And Donna Washington was the presenter. And I actually applied for a scholarship and received it. So I felt like, it was meant to be, it's in the stars. So I took that workshop, and Donna Washington just was amazing. And I thought, I want to really do this in the world. And so I started pursuing it really heavily at that point.
Ah, so that was the beginning. I have to go back a little bit to something we discussed earlier, and that was your travel. You used to be in Little Switzerland, North Carolina, which is just down the Blue Ridge Parkway from Asheville, and now you're on the coast. Tell us about the transition and what's happening with you now.
Well, first of all, the time we spent 10 years in the mountains at a retreat facility called Little Switzerland. That's where my husband worked and we lived on site there. And it was there that I feel like I had 10 years of workshop in storytelling. I mean, it is just the place where storytelling is like breathing. It's part of everything. So my education in storytelling really happened there. And then we came to the end of this time period, and it was just time for a change. Our daughter was going off to college. My husband was ready for a change of work, and the lifestyle there is pretty intense, where you live where you work, you know. So we love the coast. We met at the coast, and we decided we wanted to come back to the coastal geography. So we are in a fifth wheel camper, which we moved into. We decided we were going to live in our camper for a while. Before COVID, we were actually going to go across the country and really do some traveling with our daughter before she started school. But with COVID, we kept it in North Carolina, and we did a coastal tour with her. And we're still in our camper because we're trying to figure out where we want a more permanent residence. But we just are soaking up every bit of nature here at the coast, because with COVID and social distancing and all that craziness, here you can still get out and you can walk on the beach, and you can walk the trails, and uh, it's good for the soul.
But you just nailed it, Sherry. During COVID, it's so important to just to get out in the woods. If you're by the ocean, go to the ocean. You don't have to always be around people, but just to enjoy nature is so inspiring during this time. And speaking of COVID, how has this impacted your work?
Well, like everybody else, everything in person was come to an end. Like that was it. So then I transitioned to online. I was already starting to look at online teaching through a company called OutSchool. And that is great because I can use storytelling, like I said, as a centerpiece. I make my own lessons. I center it around a story. And so I'm getting to story tell with kids in that scenario with kids. And it's just great. And even though it's on the computer, I still feel like through the stories, I can connect with those kids, so I feel good about that. Um, Gosh, I guess I can't remember how many weeks ago it was, but there was a family that reached out that were having a gathering at their home. We talked about COVID protocol and how it could be safely done, because they really wanted something in person, and I hadn't done anything in person in so long. I said yes, and we figured out how to make it work, and it was so wonderful to be in person, and they were appreciative of the experience being different from all the online and computer centered stuff. So I definitely miss that, being in person, and yet it's working, like you just have to make the best of it, and I think that's what we're all doing.
I'm a bit envious that you got to do a live performance. But I have to also say that Zoom has been interesting. A lot of people don't like it because it's awkward and you're not person to person. The human touch is gone. But I find for this interview, and I teach a class on storytelling, Zoom has actually worked out very well. The We're able to connect, yet we're in different places. It's unusual. I kind of like it.
in
Well,
some
yeah, go
in
ahead.
some ways, that silver lining is that people from all over can come together. So one of the things that I did is I created an intimate class of only 5 people, called Self-Exploration Through Story. And I used that, again, there's a centerpiece story that then these 5 people and I explore some of the inner landscape together through the symbolism of the story. That's another way I've shifted in the COVID times, is and using storytelling. And I feel like that we've been able to connect really well over Zoom, and I have people from across the country come in for that.
And isn't it therapeutic? It's this art of storytelling, looking inward, like you mentioned. You become your own therapist through storytelling, and by that look inward, you're doing a great job. You, how did you start learning ballads? You said that you were also your stories include ballads.
Oh, I love this story, Chuck. So when I moved to the mountains, I heard a ballad for the first time. And I am a happy ending kind of girl. And the ballads are not happy ending kind of songs. If you don't know anything about them, in the mountains, they're called the love songs,
Ah,
but they're all murder ballads.
that's what I've heard. I've heard them called murder ballads, but not love songs. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if if you're listening to this radio show, you probably know something about storytelling. Sheila K. Adams is the premier ballad singer. But yeah, the people in the mountains call them love songs, but they're all murder ballads, and that's really not my thing. But I just the sound of it was beautiful and haunting. I just loved it. So the one I heard, I wanted to learn it. And like I said, my husband was working and we were living at Wild Acres Retreat Facility, which has 80 to 100 groups of all kinds come, including Ringling College of Art and Design from Sarasota, Florida. They come and hold summer classes there. And one of their classes was figure drawing. And they hired a local mountain woman named Loy McWhorter, who is happens to be a ballad singer. She's in her 60s and she's been in the mountains forever and sings ballads and is also an incredible artist herself. Anyway, she came in. I said, Loy, I would really like to learn this song. Do you know it? She said, yeah, she did. And she'd help me with the words because I was looking for the particular words of the one I'd heard. Well, the next day she came in and she had handwritten, and her script is beautiful. The words of the ballad. Well, it was 2 pages front and back, so 4 pages. I mean, these ballads are long. And she said to me when she handed them to me, she said, Sherry, modeling for this class is kind of boring. I'm just sitting there for long periods of time. If you don't mind that I'm naked.
Oh, this is a show for everyone, but go ahead.
She said, you can come in and I will teach you the ballad, while they're drawing me. So it was a nude figure drawing class. But hey, you know what? I was not going to let that bother me at all. I said, well, yeah. So I went in and sat with her. So she was holding her pose and all the artists were drawing and painting her. And we were singing this gruesome ballad the way that it's been taught for generations in the mountains, which is what they call knee to knee. So you're with the person and they sing and you learn it that way. So it's one of my favorite stories.
It sounds like there was more than just knee to knee, but we won't go into that. I'm going to ask you to do a ballad, but before we do that, I have to satisfy the folks in Washington by saying you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally at WPVMFM.org. And now, Sherry, it's your turn. I want to hear one of your ballads.
Okay. You did that very well, Chuck.
Oh, thanks.
Okay. So this is, I just got through telling you that these are mostly all gruesome ballads. So I have to say, I did find one that had a happy ending. So that's the one I want to share. And Veterans Day is coming up, right?
Yep. Yep.
Okay.
In
So
fact, by the way, this is Veterans Day.
Okay. Okay, good. Well, then this fits really well then. Okay. Said a pretty fair miss all in her garden, and a handsome young soldier come a riding by. Said, could I impose on a fair young maiden and ask her for my bride to be? Said handsome young soldier standing by the gateway, a man of honor you may be. How could you impose on a fair young maiden who never intends your bride to be? Said, I have a fair love who's gone to the army, and he's been gone for 7 years long. And if he stays gone 7 years longer, no man on earth could marry me. Said, perhaps your lover's drowned in the ocean. Perhaps he's on some battlefield slain. Perhaps he's taken another girl to marry. His face you'll never see again. Well, if he's drowned, I hope he's happy. Or if he's on some battlefield slain. Or if he's taking another girl to marry, I'd love the girl who could marry him. His fingers being long and slender, into his pockets they did go. Said, here's the ring that you did give me before I started for the war. She threw her lily white arms around him. Straight before him she did fall. Said, you're the man that used to court me before you started for the war. Said, I've been on the deep sea sailing, and I've been sailing for 7 years long. And if I'd stay gone 7 years longer, no girl on earth could marry me.
Wow. I want to go back so the folks can see both of us. Sherry, you have these talents that I just am so envious of. You can sing. What I mean by that, if I sing in the shower, the tile starts falling off. It goes down the drain. You have a beautiful voice. Wow.
Thank you. I do love to sing, and I love those ballads. They terrify me, though. I must say that when I do ballads on stage, I that's when I'm most nervous.
How come?
It's I don't know exactly. I think it's a very vulnerable thing to sing in public, and it's no musical accompaniment. Um, and they are very particular. There's a very particular order to the songs versus a story where you might, if you don't say one thing here, you can meander around and get it in. You know what I mean?
I have no idea what you're talking about. By the way, I teach a class on storytelling for older folks at OLLI, at the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. And I tell them the key is no one knows what you forgot.
That's right.
So that's helped us a lot. We can put it in wherever we want if we do remember it. But I'm sorry I interrupted.
Oh no, that's right. Yes.
Well, we've talked about some of your beginnings in storytelling. What stories or storytellers have influenced you the most besides those that you've just mentioned?
Well, Donna Washington got me going.
Mhm.
And then when I was in the mountains, when we moved there and I went to the circle, Gwenda Ledbetter, the story lady, I heard her tell and I was like, that's it. That's it. That's the magic. So I've been learning from her ever since. And in fact, there are many fabulous tellers in the circle, and I could name pretty much everybody. But Gwenda did have a huge impact on me. Connie Reagan Blake, Michael Reno Harrell, all who have done storytelling professionally out in the world. I also did a summer institute at ETSU, which has a master's in storytelling.
That's
I've always thought,
Eastern Tennessee State University.
yes, yes. And so I took a summer institute there with Bill Milbury Birch and Antonio Hasha.
Hmm.
They had a huge impact on me and storytelling. Milbury Birch, who is phenomenal and does a lot of really powerful stories in the world for social change, she impacted me and my work in terms of thinking about like, how well do I know my work in terms of inside and out and the specific details and the background that you may not tell, but it's there to inform the story. Antonio Hasha is he was a mime, and so he does a lot of physicality in his story, and he had a huge impact on how I use my body language and movements in storytelling.
And
Um,
and you do a lot of movement in your stories. I've noticed. By the way, for everyone that's listening or watching, Sherry and I are both members of the Asheville Storytelling Circle, which is the circle I think that Sherry was referring to. And
Yes.
just another little note, Gwenda Ledbetter will be my guest in December. And we've just been talking. She's agreed to come on, and she is one of the most special people, not just as a storyteller, but what a kind, generous, and warm human being Gwenda is. And she's closing in on 90 now, isn't she?
Gwenda is 91, going on 91. I think she's 90, going on 91.
And in
Yeah.
terms of her energy, you can't tell.
I looked at people she's my role model for aging. So my own mother did not age well, and she's no longer with us, and I miss her terribly. And I watched her aging process, and it was painful. But Gwenda has remained vibrant and energetic and learning and engaged, and that's how I want to be that way.
Exactly. Exactly. She's a role model in so many ways. For me as a storyteller, I just marvel when I am able to watch and listen to Gwenda
Mhm.
tell a story. She's captivating. And so are
Yes.
you, by the way. You mentioned something about stage fright. Do you have,
Oh,
how do you overcome it if you do?
oh, stage fright is such a killer. Yeah, there have been times where I thought I'm gonna be sick physically. Like I was so nervous, I thought I'm not gonna make it. Uh, and Connie Reagan Blake has wonderful workshops, and she was really helpful in some uh, exercises and practices to help calm yourself as you go on the stage. And a lot of it's just breathing, nice deep breaths and sort of grounding yourself, and feeling that. But I'll tell you something that helped me tremendously is there's this therapy called guided imagery. And I know about this again through Wild Acres in Little Switzerland, because that was one of the groups that came from Appalachian State University. They would train people in this technique. And it boils down to you are laying down, and they select a music to play for you, and then they ask you questions, and you imagine and you say what you're seeing in your imagination. Well, they needed a participant because they were short. And I said, sure, I'll do it. I'm here. Well, it turned out to be immensely helpful, because as I went through my imaginings, well, my father showed up. Now, my father died the summer before my senior year of college, a long time ago. But he always was he encouraged me and supported me and gave me confidence. And so he showed up in this guided imagery, and he walked with me along the beach. That's where we were in my imagination, and we're talking, and I end up on a stage in front of a microphone, and he's sitting in the audience, and he says, "You've got this, doll. You can do this."
Hmm.
And I just felt this I don't know, peace descend, and I carried it out of that session, and it really has helped me since then, going on the stage, to feel a little more at ease. So it's not gone, it's still there, but it just is better. So I remember that. I remember my Connie Reagan Blake exercises, and I go out anyway.
You mentioned something that to me is so spiritual, and that is that our loved ones who have passed never really leave us. And especially in times where we have a great personal need, that imagery that you just discussed, that's what comes out. It's so important. Yeah.
Hmm.
So you manage your stage fright. I have to tell you, this is kind of freak people out when they hear this. I have never experienced stage fright. I came close one time. The one time was I took a class on stand-up comedy, and the graduation ceremony was to do a stand-up in front of 120 people. That was scary. I almost felt like I was naked, and they were all looking at me. Come on, make me laugh. That was a little bit tough, but other than that, high school, elementary school, all the way through, I've enjoyed the stage, which makes me weird.
No, I'm envious. I'm so envious. I actually have asked people over years, this same question: do you get stage fright? Well, I've had some interesting answers. Sheila K. Adams, I asked her because I was told with her at North Carolina Storytelling Guild Festival long time ago, and she said she didn't get nervous because she's just talking to people. And really, that if you've seen her, that's true. She's just having a conversation with the audience. It's beautiful. But now, one of my other favorite storytellers, Janice Del Negro, who is amazing. She gets such bad stage fright that she almost feels sick every time. Like she never has gotten over it. So, and there's everything in between. But I do envy people who don't feel it.
Well, sure, I have to ask you another question that's a little bit off the walls here, but I have to ask it anyway. Where's your middle name? I know so many people from this region that have middle names that they use. Michael Reno Harrell, David Miller, Connie Reagan Blake. Where's yours?
I guess I needed to put it in there. No, my middle name from birth is Ann, but I've kept my maiden name King in my whole name, so Sherry King Lovett. But I just go with Sherry Lovett. You gotta love it.
That's a lot easier to remember than say, you got to think it.
Make it till you make it.
Oh, yeah. So, you have so many different types of storytelling. What's your favorite aspect of storytelling?
Well, absolutely my favorite thing is connecting with people. I don't care what kind of stories you're telling, you're always connecting with people in some way or another. And so that is my absolute favorite thing. And I've told in a wide variety of venues and ways, but that's my favorite. And I also love how storytelling can um, inspire change in the world by getting people to think differently or think deeper than maybe they had thought about something before. Um, one of my favorite storytelling gigs was at the Alta Pass Orchard, the orchard at Alta Pass off the Blue Ridge Parkway, which was close to where I lived at the time at Wild Acres. And that place is a 501c nonprofit, and they use storytelling to share the message of the place. So I was one of their storytellers. I learned all the stories from Bill Carson, the owner operator, and I would tell the stories on the hay ride. And so it was very close and personal, and you're interacting with people, and you're sharing the history of this place, and raising awareness about all kinds of things that are included in that storytelling. So yeah, I love all of that.
Can you maybe give us a taste of one of the stories that originated from your love of storytelling?
Yes, I would love to tell you one from the orchard again that goes along with the Veterans Day idea. So the orchard sits at the Eastern Continental Divide. Now, I'm sure you know what that is, right, Chuck?
But others may not, so go ahead.
So I didn't know until I started telling the stories that the Eastern Continental Divide is basically about where the water goes when it rains. You know, when the rain comes down on the top of that mountain and it goes down the ridge to the east side, it goes to the Catawba River and on out to the Atlantic Ocean. But when it falls on the western side, it goes to the Tow Rivers and then on out to the Gulf of Mexico. But back in the time when the English were settling in that area, King George III, you always have to spit when you say his name because we didn't like him. That's straight from Bill Carson. So he made the Eastern Continental Divide actually a political boundary line. And he said that the settlers could settle on the east side, but the west side was for the Cherokee people, who, of course, were the first ones there. And that was really good for the Cherokee. Unfortunately, the settlers didn't listen. They liked the land on the west side. We're talking Tennessee way. And they moved over there anyway. It was a little farther from the King's Reach, and they liked that too. So King George III, he was paying the Cherokee for the scalps of anybody living on the west side. And on that side, they called those folks the over mountain men because they were over the mountain, or the backwater men because the water went backwards over there. Unfortunately, the Cherokee really didn't care whether they were over mountain men or on the eastern side. They all looked the same. They'd take whoever's scalp because they were getting paid. So it put everybody at risk. And so over on the west side, they were particularly at risk, and they built forts to protect themselves when the Cherokee were attacking. and they would run in. One day that was happening. The Cherokee were attacking. They ran into the fort for protection, but one woman didn't make it in. Her name was Catherine Sherrill, and everybody called her Bonnie Kate. Bonnie means beautiful, and she was. She didn't make it in. She was crying, "Let me in, let me in." Of course, they wouldn't open the fort because they knew if they opened the fort, the Cherokee would come running in. The Cherokee were waiting to see, were they going to open the gates? In the meantime, there was a man named John Sevier who saw her. He went over to one side of that fort and he called to her, "Bonnie Kate, over here, over here." She came over. He reached down for her. She reached over him, but it was too far. They couldn't reach each other. So he said, "Men, grab my legs. Hold me over this side." So his men grabbed his leg, held him over the side of the fort. He reached down for Bonnie Kate. Bonnie Kate reached up for him, and he was able to grab her hands. And he pulled her up over into the fort and saved Bonnie Kate's life. He was a hero. And you probably won't be surprised to find out that sometime later they got married. But they were only married for a few weeks when John Sevier was called to be a hero again. You see, it was the time of the Revolutionary War, and it looked for all the world like England was going to win. There was a Major Patrick Ferguson who had been squashing any rebellion on the east side by burning homes and hanging men as traitors. He hated the over mountain men because they'd come over the mountain and fire at the English and then run back across the mountain. But he had never gone over there after them until this point. And when it looked as though the English were going to win, he sent word over the mountain. He said, "I'm coming. I'm coming over the mountain for you. I'm going to burn your farms and I'm going to hang your men as traitors." Well, John Sevier and the other leaders on the over mountain side, they said, "Oh, no, he's not. We're not letting him come over to our farms and families." And so they began to gather volunteers. You may know that Tennessee's the volunteer state. They began to gather volunteers until they had 1,000 men marching to face Major Patrick Ferguson on the east side. Now, it just so happens that their walk, which started in September, took them right through the orchard property where the orchard is today. So when you're there, you're in history. It just feels amazing. So these were called the Over Mountain Men, and they were marching along in September, which back then was colder than it is now. It snowed on them. They didn't bring enough food. They were marching longer than they thought. They ran out. They had to forage. Sometimes they couldn't find anything good to eat. And once they could only find green pumpkins, which they ate, and they got terribly sick. Not only that, but they found that 2 of the men had left, and they knew those 2 men had turned traitor. Now they had a dilemma. Did they keep going and risk being ambushed by Major Patrick Ferguson's troop? Or did they go back over the mountain and risk him coming over to their farms and families? They weren't going to do that. So they kept marching with a wary eye out for Major Patrick Ferguson until they finally got word of where he was. He had taken up on King's Mountain. And so they devised a plan. 900 of the men on horseback decided that they would go in 2 groups to King's Mountain, and they would each go up a different side. They'd attack from 2 sides. It's October now, and it rains and rains on them as they make this final leg. Now, the rain, all that rain, did 2 things. They were riding on dirt roads, and the rain damped down the dust so it didn't give away that they were coming. And this group of men arrived on time. But this group of men had to go through a swampy area, and all that rain made it hard going, and so they were late. This group of men went up the mountain and they fired at Ferguson. Ferguson said, "This is it." And his men went after him. Now, you have to know something about the weapons used at that time. You see, the Over Mountain men were using long rifles, which were accurate to about 100 yards. You could aim at something pretty far away and hit it. But when you fired it, it gave a puff of smoke, which gave your location away. And it took almost a minute to reload that weapon. Now, the English had muskets, not very accurate. You had to be pretty close to hit what you were aiming at. But on the end of that musket was a great big knife, the bayonet. And there was no defense against the bayonet. In fact, more men in the Revolutionary War died from the bayonet than the bullet. So the Overmountain men fired at Ferguson and his men. Ferguson and his men said, "This is it, let's go." And they chased after the Overmountain men, and they did what they always did. They ran. There was no defense against the bayonet. Well, just then, this group arrived, came up the mountain. They fired at Ferguson. Ferguson said, "Don't worry about them. Let's go after these men." Now, this group did something that they had never done before. They stopped. They reloaded their weapons. They came back up the mountain and they fired at Ferguson's men just as they were chasing this group down. Ferguson said, "Don't worry about them. Let's go after these." These men stopped and reloaded. And that's how the battle went for just over an hour, up and over Kings Mountain, until Major Patrick Ferguson saw that he had lost. He was trying to slip out because he knew if they caught him, they'd hang him. Well, a 16-year-old boy named Gilliland saw him. He took aim with his long rifle and he fired, but it misfired. There was a 62-year-old man beside him named Robert Young. And Gilliland said, "Robert, take aim. There goes Ferguson." So Robert Young took aim with his long rifle, which he had nicknamed the same nickname he had for his wife, Sweet Lips. Now, I believe that's because they'd both knock you over. He took aim, he fired, and he hit Ferguson. Ferguson said, "God Almighty and all his angels can't get me off this mountain." And he kept that promise. He was shot on Kings Mountain, he died on Kings Mountain, and he's buried on Kings Mountain. Ever after that, so hated was he for all that he had done that people would take rocks and they would throw him on his grave. There are 2 rocks on that grave that Bill Carson, the owner operator of the orchard, threw there himself. Now, a little side note to this story about John Sevier becoming this hero. Well, couple things. You should know that John Sevier became the first governor of Tennessee, and Catherine Sherrill Bonnie Kate, the first lady, and that Sweet Lips, the rifle, hangs in the Tennessee State Museum. But now the side note to that is that Bill Carson didn't know any of that history until he came to operate the orchard. And he just was thrilled to learn the history. And he has family from Tennessee, and he was telling them, an old aunt of his, about what he'd learned. And he said she was just fidgeting, like wishing he'd hurry up. And finally he finished it. She said, "Lordy, son, don't you know anything? You telling a story about your own kinfolk." It turns out that Robert Young, who shot and killed Major Patrick Ferguson, that according to Thomas Jefferson, turned the tide of the Revolutionary War in our favor, is Bill Carson's great, 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 great grandfather.
Wow. That is an incredible story. And like you say, you're teaching history through storytelling. Wow. And for the folks who may not be familiar with our area, Kings Mountain is Little Switzerland on Kings Mountain, or is it near Kings Mountain?
It's about an hour away.
Okay.
Yeah.
And John Sevier, for those that may not be aware, not only was the first governor, but there's a town near Dollywood called Sevierville.
Yeah, that's after him. Yeah, and he was the first governor.
Yeah. And then there's that other part of Tennessee where was the state of Franklin, Eastern Tennessee. And that was going to be the state. The new state was going to be the state of Franklin. Jonesboro was going to be the state capital. And it never happened because they asked for Benjamin Franklin's help. And he said, not so much.
Oh.
So Tennessee. And there's much more information than anybody needs to know. So this is so much fun, Sherry. I just love getting to know you better and getting to hear your stories and sharing you with our audience. You must have stories though that have gotten away. Can you tell us maybe about a story or two that got away that you wish you were able to get and tell, but you lost it?
Yeah, those there are a couple that really hurt my heart, and I tell this in hopes that other people will not make my mistake. So first, my father was a prisoner of war in World War II in a German camp for 11 months. World War II vets, there are not that many left, they didn't talk about it. They just came back and just went to regular life. And I was a surprise in my family. I have a brother 20 years older than me and a brother 14 years older than me. Surprise. um, so certainly I did not hear my father talk about the war, except one thing which he talked about. Everybody was starving, so he never said really horrible things about the Germans. He said everybody was starving. The Germans were starving. He and my father, over 6 feet tall, came out extremely emaciated, and he remembered the prisoners fighting. They there was an old horse that died, and they gave it to the prisoners to eat, and he remembers fighting over part of that, and somebody getting their jaw broke in the scuffle. Um, my brother Glenn, who is 20 years older than I am, he did hear my dad talking with his buddies. And Glenn sort of, he tucked back in a corner unnoticed and just listened. And I've interviewed my brother to kind of try to piece together what he heard to get some of it. But it's a heartbreak to not have my father's stories. If I had known to ask him, that, then I can't get that back. So, and my mother died of Alzheimer's 5 years ago, and I did manage to get some things from her. I did a book for my daughter. It was a grandmother's book where I interviewed my mom. So I did get some stories from her, but it was a little late when I started doing it. So there were things that she couldn't remember, and it just disappeared. And I wish I had asked my mother more questions and gotten more of her story. So those are those are my big losses in the story world, and their personal things, just what their stories were.
So your personal losses have also turned into a bit of an opportunity where, as a storyteller, you're able to tell your personal story so that your daughter and other loved ones along the way will always have your stories as part of their family tradition, their family history.
Yeah, with my understanding of how when you're young, you don't always think about asking questions and getting the stories. I actually have started a journal for my daughter that someday may illuminate things that she didn't think to ask me or that we haven't talked about. So there are pieces of my story that I'm just recording in this journal for her. And so hopefully she won't have the same sadness of, oh, I didn't know my mom's stories. Here's the book.
That it's so valuable because just on a personal level, my wife is from New England. She was a professor. She's got all these wonderful things, but our sons, we realize, probably don't know all the details. So she actually wrote a memoir that's self-published. Not going to break publication records, but it's called "Hanging Icicles." Beware of hanging icicles: Tales of a New England Girl. And it breaks up her first 22 years of life. And in such detail, our sons now are saying, I never knew that. Oh, that happened. I never was aware of that. So what you're doing is another version to keep our lives as open books, if you will, for
Yes.
generations to follow. And
Yeah,
that's
because when you're young, you don't know to ask. You don't think about it.
if you get the answer, you usually say, oh, do I have to listen to this? If you're young.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of trying to satisfy people, it's now my turn to satisfy our government by saying you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally on the internet at WPVMFM.org. And when you do that, you're going to listen and see and enjoy Sherry Lovett, because she's just been a wonderful guest. Oh, Sherry, this is so much fun. You mentioned your teachers in storytelling. What are your upcoming events that you have? In COVID, it's a little bit difficult, but what do you have coming up?
Well, I'm super excited. I'm telling for the Asheville Storytelling Circle Celebration. It's always been a marvelous event at the Folk Arts Center in Asheville. And of course, this year it's virtual. So I'm excited to be one of the tellers for that. It's going to be a great event with so many wonderful tellers. And I also was fortunate enough to be asked to MC the North Carolina Storytelling Guild Festival. So I had a great time creating videos to introduce all the tellers for that event, and that's going to be remarkable. That's coming up this weekend. This weekend is the guild, and it is virtual, and you can get a pass for, I can't remember how many days it is, but so those were the two things sort of out performance wise. And then I mentioned I have this class that I'm offering. So it is, but I limit it to 5. So it's a very small thing, but it's one of my favorite ways of using storytelling in the world, is to have something that we are going to look at together, the symbolism and the layers and what it means to you when you hear the story, because every person hears what they need to hear from any given story. I truly believe that. And stories always come to me when I need them. And I gravitate towards the ones that feed me at any particular time in my life. Like, for example, my mother having Alzheimer's, Gwenda Ledbetter tells the redheaded woman and Mr. Death. And that's actually a literary piece, but Gwenda has her own version. And when I was going through that, she gifted me. And that's a big deal for a storyteller, to give a story and say, here, you tell it. And when she first gave it to me, I, of course, couldn't tell it because I would just cry. But it was just what I needed, because it was about a redheaded woman. My mother was redheaded, and lots of spunk, and that this idea that death is not an enemy, that it can be a gift, is, and that story just nourished me so much. So that was a little aside.
It's a little aside, just a couple other asides on your aside is I'm actually sponsoring. I'm going to sponsor this year for the North Carolina Storytelling Guild Festival. So it's just, by the way, folks, storytellers are the nicest people in the world. Anytime you meet a storyteller, they're always nice people. And if you get to go to a festival, you're surrounded not only by the tellers who are nice people, but the audience members. Even if they're not nice going in, by the time they're finished listening to the stories, they turn into nice people. And I also had the pleasure of telling a couple of stories at the Folk Arts Center, which is on the Blue Ridge Parkway. Folks, if you're not from this region, Asheville and the area around us is just rich with Appalachian traditions, natural beauty, and we're just so fortunate to be in this wonderful area along the Blue Ridge Parkway. But I was telling a very deeply personal story about a health condition that I've had to deal with and have overcome. And Gwenda was in the audience. And after that, she came up and she was so sweet. And then she wrote me an email, and I keep that email. I'll keep it for the rest of my life because it was so encouraging and so sweet. So the Folk Arts Center, the North Carolina Story Guild, I'm just trying to find some common here. Well, oh boy. You have you ever told a story that got an opposite reaction of what you were expecting?
Hmm. Yes, I'm trying to think of what it was. There was a story that I told, and people laughed, and it wasn't really funny. So, and I'm trying to think about what story that was. Because I tell a lot of, I tell a lot of Celtic material, and often it's a bit, mysterious and ethereal and that kind of thing. But for whatever reason, it was just striking people kind of funny. I can't remember which one it was now, but I do remember the feeling of like, huh, they that okay, I didn't think that was funny, but
For folks that aren't tellers, every audience is different. So
Mhm.
we may find a reaction from one audience that just is over the top and is exactly what we were hoping for. Tell the same exact story the same exact way to another audience, and you'll get.
Yes. So I have to tell you, Chuck, that makes me think. So as again, we've just moved from Wild Acres, so a lot of what I'm saying keeps referring back to that. But I was the resident storyteller for Wild Acres. I told the story of that place because it has a really particular history, and it's the tradition to share the story with each group on the first night that they arrive. Um, and so that's, I was telling that story 80 to 100 times is every group, and some groups would, because the story has some funny parts and some serious parts, and some groups would laugh and they'd be really engaged. But the most difficult time I ever had, it was a science group of some kind, very serious people, and they looked at me like this the whole time.
I'm sorry for laughing. I know the feeling. That's why I'm
I
like.
mean, there was nothing. There was no response. There was no facial, nothing. And I thought, oh, I mean, I was like, okay, I can get through it. I got through the story and I thought, wow, I don't know what just happened there. That was really rough. Well, later, those folks, several of them came up and said, oh, that was such a compelling story. I really enjoyed that. So you don't know what's going on. It really does depend on the people and the way they are in the world. And scientists definitely had a very particular way of listening.
And that's such an important point. Listening for anyone, listening is the key to storytelling. I tell the students in my class at Ollie, listen to other storytellers. That's how you improve. That's how you get better. So, Sherry, I hope you don't mind that I included one of yours in one of the classes as an example of doing that. But you're right. And it's so weird when you get the opposite reaction of what you're expecting. But I think over time, as we get more experienced at it, we also understand that that's going to happen, and we just deal with it.
Yep. The thing is to keep going.
So, if I may, on the opposite side of that question, what was the most wonderful reaction you got telling a story? Do you remember?
uh yeah, a couple things. So there was one performance at the Feed and Seed in Fletcher. I think it's Fletcher.
Mhm.
Have you heard of that, the Feed and
Oh, yes.
Seed?
Yes, I
Yeah.
have.
So Asheville Storytelling Circle used to do things there quite a bit, but I had the best audience. One of my favorite stories is Dame Ragnell, which is a King Arthur tale, and it's a little bit bawdy. It's definitely a grown-up story, and it's got some humor, and people just laughed so much, and I had the best time with that audience. I'll always remember that because generally speaking, I'm not really funny. I laugh easily. I would love to laugh, but my stories tend to be on the serious side, like I said, more mystical and mysterious. And, so I'm trying to include more humor and work on that piece, but I generally am not that funny. So to tell this story with its humor in it and have people laugh like that was really great, because that is immediate feedback. That humor, that laughter, the audience, it's like, oh, they're with me, we're in this together. It feels really good when they laugh.
And that's such
um
a good feeling, being in it together with the audience. And if humor
yeah.
can do that, that's wonderful.
So the other thing is the it's a little tricky because I know politics is a touchy, but Wild Acres is founded by a Jewish family,
Hmm.
and so the story talks about what it was going to be, which was basically a white supremacist colony. And then that didn't happen through the fates. It became now this place that's dedicated to the betterment of all human relations and interfaith dialogue. And so when I tell this story, it's really powerful place and mission. And in our political climate, we have a lot of Jewish people that come to Wild Acres, and it's been a hard 4 years for them.
So,
uh,
I have to interrupt here because we're starting to wind down. But as a Jewish person, I so appreciate the work that you and Wild Acres have done. And you're right, it's a tough time, but we have to come together. We have to be resilient. And being Jewish, resiliency is just part of what we've have to endure over the years.
And
Sherry,
that's what the story did. It brought that connection. I loved that. That was meaningful for people to really feel the peace of the place.
well, Sherry, I have enjoyed just sharing you with our audience and just being with you. You're always uplifting, you're always encouraging, and I'm just so happy you were my guest. So, folks, I hope you enjoyed talking and listening to Sherry, actually listening to Sherry, as much as I enjoyed both talking and listening. Sherry, it's been a wonderful delight. Thank you so much. And, folks, again, you're listening to WPVM, FM, and Asheville. I'm Chuck Fink, host of Storyville. And with that, Sherry and I say goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you all.